dunce caps and get to work. Joining us now to sort through all of the congressional to-do list is United States Representative Steve Cohen. He not with a dunce cap. He represents Tennessee's 9th District. He joins us tonight from Memphis, Tennessee. Thanks for being here, Congressman.
You're welcome, Daddy. Just one of your children here.
Well, I like when
Sorry
Congressman.
about the Father's Day. I forgot the Father's Day.
Yeah,
card.
I was going to say, where's my gift? Where's my gift, Congressman?
So it's in the mail.
I'm waiting. The House of Representatives.
And some of my best friends.
which is your office, is on its way to its worst report card ever. Tell us why.
Well, it's amazing that the Republicans are in charge, and rather than trying to get some things done, they would rather just message. They've tried, I think, 37 times to repeal the Affordable Care Act. They've tried so many times just to appeal to their base on issues concerning regulations. And it was funny, the other day I watched some TV show about Ronald Reagan, and his speech was this. You could have heard his speech yesterday in the House. It was about small business and regulations and government spending. And it's the same pablum, but the fact is, if Ronald Reagan was in the House, he'd be considered a liberal, because Ronald Reagan did understand some things about government and made government work. These people in charge, the Tea Party is kind of in control. They don't want to get anything done. They don't want to move America forward. They are so stuck on cutting spending and allegedly being concerned about this debt. In other ways, they're just, and we talked about it 2-3 years ago about the robes, and I don't want to go there again, but I was right. But you know, they have the same agenda as these know-nothing folks did, and they just picked up. Phyllis Schlafly might as well be, you know, at the charge of the party.
Yeah, and that is a backwards party. I mean, in a way, we should be gleeful about it, because there's nothing sort of that bodes well for them in the future. But at the same time, they're in charge of the House of Representatives. Nothing's getting done. Let's go to last week when SCOTUS threw out Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, which is a prelude to trying to do it to Section 5. They said Congress could rewrite it. Conventional wisdom says that's too much to ask of this Congress. But back in 2006, the Senate renewed the Voting Rights Act 98-0, and the House renewed it 390-33. So, Congressman, is conventional wisdom wrong? Will Congress take up the Voting Rights Act?
Well, you know, there are some people who've got an optimism, and I guess you've always got to be hopeful. And Jim Sensenbrenner, Republican from Wisconsin, has agreed to work with John Conyers on trying to do something. And Eric Cantor said he was affected by his visit to Alabama and wanted to do something. I don't see it happening, though. There's one thing about voting against the Voting Rights Act, which was like apple pie and motherhood. And there's another thing about Section 4 and trying to come up with which areas of the country need to have pre-clearance. And certainly they're not going to go for all parts of the country, because then everybody would have a legislature that would be upset about it in local governments. And I just think that they're going to find a way to say, well, we just couldn't come up to an answer, and we're going to work on it, we're going to study it, and they'll put it off. Because the fact is, the Republican Party doesn't want African Americans and minorities to vote. They showed it in the last election. The whole thing with voter ID, all of the changes in precincts, all of the things they did were ways that they admitted were to obfuscate the minority vote. The young people's vote, African Americans' vote. They wanted to make it difficult for people to vote, and they can't win if there's a large turnout. They don't want large turnouts. They don't want every election day registration. And in the states that were under preclearance, those are the states, they're all, with the exception of Virginia, and that's because of a Washington spillover in Alexandria and Arlington and all, they're all old red states. And even though they might have gone, you know, Obama, they said, oh, well, Obama got elected, so everything's different. Well, Obama didn't get elected in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and Texas, and Louisiana. Right. You know, and so it's just not there was no basis to the Supreme Court decision. It was embarrassing, I think, for Justice Roberts and the four who went with him to really an activist situation where they claim not to be an activist court. They were activists striking down a law of Congress that sends them. But back to your question, I don't think they'll pass a Section 4, because I don't think there's one thing about being against voting rights and another thing about advancing them. They can always say, well, the Voting Rights Act still exists because there's certain prohibitions, and the Justice Department can bring actions. But there's a big difference on who has the burden of proof and whether or not they have to get pre-clearance, and determining which jurisdictions are the most necessary to get pre-clearance is going to be difficult. But even if we could do it, I think the Republicans will find a way not to do it. Much of the House Republican caucus is in those states that were in pre-clearance. That's where they're growing. Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. That's where the Blue Dogs were, and North Carolina even. They knocked out the Blue Dogs. Part of it was redistricting, but they knocked them out. It's all Republican except for African Americans and David Price and me and John Yarmouth. That's about it.
It seems that way. And, you know, I find it so amazing. We were talking to your colleague, Congresswoman Karen Bass, earlier in the show. And we were talking about...
Child.
Well, exactly, my number one. Well, she's my representative, so I'm partial here. But you know, we were talking about the idea that these Republicans, you know, the ones that you speak to in the hallways. I mean, I'm sure you have a nice, cordial relationship with a handful of them. Don't they understand that they are losing minority voters, and minority voters that's the biggest growing population block in this country? That they're losing students who are the youngest voters, the newest, when they go ahead with this foolishness with the student loans. What do they say to you in confidence, without being specific, about what the direction their party's going?
Well, first of all, and I think it's a misconception people have, I've got a lot of good friends on the Republican side, and most everybody gets along. I mean, and of course I took the trip to Russia with Steve King and Michelle Bachmann, and it wasn't exactly kumbaya, but we had a good time, and we got a much better relationship, and we talked to each other. And Michelle and I always did, but I don't ask them what their inner thoughts are. I think most people are concerned about their own congressional districts, and in their own congressional districts, most of those people have got districts that are drawn that they're safe, that they are Republican districts, and they're worried about their primary. It's the only place where they're worried about re-election, and their primaries voters are not concerned about Hispanics. In fact, their concern about Hispanics is keeping them away from voting and keeping them away from citizenship. So I think it's going to be tough to get a majority of the Republican caucus to agree to an immigration reform policy. Speaker Boehner, I think, would have to probably give up his speakership if he went with Democrats and a small number of Republicans to pass something, or to pass the Senate bill, as Schumer thinks he will. The Republican Party nationally will suffer, but the constituent elements in the House aren't worried about winning the national election. And they might think time's on their side. I mean, Rand Paul's running for president, so if he thinks he can run for president, what does he think about all these issues? It just they seem to be way out of touch. They have been out of touch, and if the middle class in America and the white middle class, which is the heart of the Republican Party, understood the economic issues.
I think we lost Congressman Cohen. Some interesting stuff about the way the Congress works, and we will be back here to discuss so much more about our country and FDR even.
Are you tired of those hot, sticky, sleepless